Marcus Thompson woke up at 5:30 in the morning, just like he did every Saturday for the past 15 years. His wife Sarah was still sleeping next to him. The house was quiet and peaceful. Marcus smiled as he looked at the sunlight coming through their bedroom window. It was going to be a beautiful day. He got out of bed slowly, trying not to wake Sarah. She worked hard all week as a teacher, and Saturday mornings were her time to sleep in. Marcus walked to their closet and pulled out his old running clothes. The shorts were gray and had a small hole near the pocket. His t-shirt was from his college days, faded blue with white letters that were now hard to read. His running shoes were old too, but they were comfortable and felt like old friends on his feet. Marcus had been a judge for 12 years now. Every day he sat in a big courtroom and made important decisions. People called him Your Honor and stood up when he walked into the room. He wore a long black robe and carried the weight of justice on his shoulders. But on Saturday mornings he was just Marcus. No robe, no title, just a man who loved to run. He walked quietly down the stairs and into the kitchen. The coffee maker was already set to start brewing at 5:45. Marcus had learned long ago that a good cup of coffee before his run made everything better. He poured the hot coffee into his favorite mug, the one his daughter had given him when she graduated from law school. It had a picture of scales on it and the words, "World's Best Dad," written in gold letters. As he sipped his coffee, Marcus thought about his week. There had been difficult cases, long hours and tough decisions. One case involved a young man who had made a mistake and was facing jail time. Another was about a family fighting over their father's house. These cases stayed with him, even at home. Running helped him think clearly and find peace. Marcus finished his coffee and did some light stretching in his living room. His body was 52 years old now, not 22 like when he first started running. He had to be more careful about warming up. His knees sometimes ached and his back was not as strong as it used to be, but running was still his favorite thing to do. He grabbed his house keys and walked outside. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds were singing in the trees that lined his street. Marcus lived in a nice neighborhood with big houses and well-kept lawns. His neighbors knew he was a judge and they respected him. Children would wave when they saw him jogging past their houses. Marcus started with a slow walk to warm up his muscles. He walked past the Johnson's house, where old Mr. Johnson was already working in his garden. They waved at each other like they did every Saturday morning. Mrs. Peterson was getting her newspaper from the front yard. She smiled and called out, "Good morning, Judge Thompson." "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson," Marcus called back. "Beautiful day for a run." After 5 minutes of walking, Marcus began to jog slowly. His body felt good as his muscles warmed up. His breathing was steady and calm. This was his time, his moment of freedom. No lawyers arguing in front of him, no difficult decisions to make, no phone calls from the courthouse, just his feet hitting the pavement and his heart beating in rhythm. Marcus turned onto Elm Street and headed toward Riverside Park. This was his favorite part of the run. The park was big and green, with tall trees and walking paths. There was a small lake in the middle where ducks swam and children fed them breadcrumbs during the day. Early in the morning, the park was usually empty except for a few other runners and people walking their dogs. As he entered the park, Marcus felt his stress melting away. The trees made cooling shadows on the path. The air smelled like grass and flowers. He could hear water moving in the small stream that ran through the park. This place had been his sanctuary for so many years. Marcus knew every path in Riverside Park. He knew where the roots stuck up from the ground that might trip a runner. He knew which benches had the best view of the lake. He knew where the drinking fountain was when he got thirsty. This park was like a second home to him. He jogged past the playground where his children used to play when they were young. Now, his daughter was a lawyer in another city, and his son was a doctor. They had grown up and moved away, but Marcus still remembered pushing them on the swings and watching them slide down the big yellow slide. Other people were starting to appear in the park now. Marcus saw Mrs. Chen walking her small white dog. He waved at her and she waved back with a smile. There was a young couple jogging together wearing matching blue shirts. An older man was sitting on a bench reading a newspaper and drinking coffee from a paper cup. Marcus continued his run, feeling strong and happy. His pace was steady, not too fast but not too slow. He had learned over the years that consistency was more important than speed. The goal was not to win a race but to stay healthy and clear his mind. As he ran around the lake, Marcus thought about his life. He was grateful for many things. He had a loving wife who supported him in everything he did. His children were successful and happy. He had a job that let him help people and serve his community. He lived in a safe neighborhood and had good health. Not everyone was so lucky. Marcus also thought about the people who came before his court. Many of them had not had the same opportunities he had. They came from neighborhoods where running in the park might not be safe. They had not had parents who could send them to college or law school. Life had been harder for them, and sometimes they made choices that brought them to his courtroom. These thoughts made Marcus run with purpose. Every morning, jog reminded him why his job was important. He was not just making legal decisions. He was affecting real people's lives. The responsibility was heavy, but he carried it with pride. Marcus completed his first loop around the park. He felt warmed up and ready to run a little faster. His breathing was still comfortable, and his legs felt strong. The morning sun was getting brighter and more people were coming into the park. It was going to be a busy Saturday in Riverside Park. He decided to run one more loop before heading home. Sarah would be waking up soon, and they had plans to have breakfast together and then visit the farmers market downtown. It was their Saturday tradition, something they both looked forward to all week. As Marcus started his second loop, he felt truly happy. This was his time, his space, his moment of peace. Tomorrow he would put on his black robe again and return to the serious business of being a judge. But for now, he was just a man running in the park on a beautiful Saturday morning, grateful for the life he had built and the community he served. Officer Jake Miller was having a bad morning. He had been on the police force for only 8 months and everything seemed to go wrong lately. Last week his supervisor had yelled at him for filling out a report incorrectly. Yesterday he had gotten lost while responding to a call. Now he was working the weekend shift, which meant he could not go to his nephew's birthday party. His partner, Officer Tony Rodriguez, was not much better. Tony had been a cop for 2 years, but he still felt like he had something to prove. Both young officers sat in their police car outside Riverside Park, drinking coffee and complaining about their jobs. "This is so boring," Jake said, looking at the peaceful park. "Nothing ever happens here." "Yeah, well, at least it's quiet," Tony replied. "Better than dealing with crazy people downtown." Their radio crackled with static. A voice came through clearly. "Unit 23, we have a report of suspicious activity at Riverside Park. Caller says there's a man acting strange near the lake area. Please respond." Jake and Tony looked at each other. Finally something to do. "Unit 23 responding," Tony said into the radio. He started the car and they drove slowly into the park. "What do you think suspicious activity means?" Jake asked. "Could be anything," Tony said. "Maybe someone doing drugs or something. We need to be careful." They drove through the park slowly, looking around. There were a few people walking dogs and some joggers. Everything looked normal to them. "There," Tony said, pointing toward the lake. "See that guy on the bench?" Jake looked where Tony was pointing. He saw a black man sitting alone on a bench near the water. The man was wearing running clothes and appeared to be resting. "That must be him," Jake said. "He looks, I don't know, out of place." Tony parked the car near the bench. Both officers got out and started walking toward the man. They had their hands near their weapons, just like they had been taught in training. Marcus had just finished his second loop around the park. He was sitting on his favorite bench, catching his breath and enjoying the morning. He watched the ducks swimming in the lake and felt peaceful. The sun was warm on his face and he was thinking about the breakfast he would have with Sarah. He noticed a police car pull up nearby. 2 young officers got out and started walking toward him. Marcus was not worried. He had a good relationship with the police department. Many officers appeared in his courtroom and they knew him well. "Good morning, officers," Marcus said with a friendly smile as they approached, but the officers did not smile back. They looked serious and a little nervous. "Sir, we need to talk to you," Officer Miller said. His voice was stern and official. Marcus stood up slowly. "Of course." "Is there a problem?" "We got a report about suspicious activity in this area," Officer Rodriguez said. "What are you doing here?" Marcus was confused. I'm jogging. I run here every Saturday morning. I live just a few blocks away. The officers looked at each other. Marcus noticed that they kept their hands near their guns. Sir, we're going to need to see some identification, Officer Miller said. Identification? Marcus asked. May I ask why? Just answer the question, sir, Officer Rodriguez said, his voice getting harder. Marcus felt a chill run down his back. Something was very wrong here. These officers were treating him like a criminal, but he had done nothing wrong. Of course, Marcus said calmly. My wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it slowly. Keep your hands where we can see them, Officer Miller shouted suddenly. Marcus froze. Other people in the park were starting to look in their direction. An older woman walking her dog stopped and stared. A jogger slowed down to watch what was happening. Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Marcus said, keeping his voice calm and steady. I'm Judge Marcus Thompson. I work at the county courthouse. I'm just here exercising. Sure you are, Officer Rodriguez said sarcastically. That's what they all say. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but he knew he had to stay calm. He had seen too many situations go bad when people got angry with police officers. I can prove it, Marcus said. My identification is in my wallet. You can call the courthouse if you want. Turn around and put your hands on your head, Officer Miller ordered. I beg your pardon, Marcus said. You heard him, Officer Rodriguez said. Turn around and put your hands on your head, now. Marcus could not believe what was happening. He was a respected judge, a pillar of the community. He had never been arrested in his life. He paid his taxes, served on charity boards, and helped his neighbors. Yet here were two police officers treating him like a dangerous criminal. Officers, please, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. I think you're making a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. That's for us to decide, Officer Miller said. Are you going to cooperate or not? Marcus looked around the park. More people were watching now. He saw Mrs. Chen with her little white dog looking shocked and scared. The young couple who had been jogging were standing nearby, whispering to each other. An older man had taken out his phone and was pointing it in their direction. Marcus realized he had two choices. He could argue with these officers and risk making the situation worse, or he could cooperate and hope that reason would win in the end. I'll cooperate, Marcus said quietly. But I want you to know that you're making a serious mistake. He turned around slowly and put his hands on his head. The position felt humiliating and wrong. He was a judge, someone who commanded respect in courtrooms. Now he was being treated like a common criminal in front of his neighbors. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward and grabbed Marcus's hands roughly. Don't move, he ordered. Officer Miller patted Marcus down, checking for weapons. His hands were rough and careless. Marcus felt violated and angry, but he stayed still. He's clean, Officer Miller said. What's your name? Officer Rodriguez asked. Marcus Thompson, Marcus replied. I'm a judge at the county courthouse. This is all a big misunderstanding. Yeah, right, Officer Miller said. A judge wearing old running clothes in the park at 7 in the morning. Tell us another story. Marcus felt his heart sinking. These officers had already made up their minds about him. They saw a black man sitting alone in the park, and they assumed he was up to no good. It did not matter that he was well dressed for exercise, that he was sitting peacefully, or that he had greeted them politely. Officers, please just check my identification, Marcus said. Call the courthouse. Ask anyone there about Judge Marcus Thompson. We'll check your identification at the station, Officer Rodriguez said. The station? Marcus asked, alarmed. That's right, Officer Miller said. You're under arrest. Arrested? For what? Resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, Officer Rodriguez said as he pulled out his handcuffs. Marcus almost laughed, but he was too shocked. How can I be resisting arrest when I haven't resisted anything? And how have I been disorderly? I was sitting quietly on a bench. You're being disorderly right now by arguing with us, Officer Miller said. The handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists. They were tight and uncomfortable. Marcus had seen thousands of people arrested, but he had never imagined how it would feel to have metal cutting into his own wrists. The small crowd that had gathered was getting larger. Marcus saw faces he recognized from the neighborhood. Some looked shocked, others looked away in embarrassment. He heard someone whisper, "Isn't that Judge Thompson?" But the officers did not seem to hear or care. "Let's go," Officer Rodriguez said, pushing Marcus toward their patrol car. As they walked across the grass, Marcus felt like he was living in a nightmare. This could not be happening to him. He was a judge, a respected member of the community. Yet here he was, handcuffed and being arrested for crimes he had not committed, in the park where he had jogged peacefully for 15 years. The patrol car door slammed shut behind him, and Marcus found himself sitting in the back seat like any other criminal. Through the window, he could see the bench where he had been sitting just minutes before, enjoying a quiet Saturday morning that had turned into the worst day of his life. The police car felt cold and small. Marcus sat in the back seat with his hands cuffed behind him. The metal handcuffs cut into his wrists and his shoulders ached from the awkward position. He had never been in the back of a police car before, and he was shocked by how uncomfortable it was. Through the thick glass window, Marcus watched Riverside Park disappear as they drove away. He saw the bench where he had been sitting peacefully just 20 minutes ago. He saw the path where he had been jogging, feeling happy and free. Now everything looked different, like he was seeing his neighborhood through the eyes of a criminal. Officer Miller was driving, and Officer Rodriguez was in the passenger seat. They were talking quietly to each other, but Marcus could not hear what they were saying. Sometimes they would look back at him through the metal screen that separated the front and back seats. "Officers," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm and respectful. "I really think there's been a mistake here. If you would just call the courthouse, they can tell you who I am." "Save it for the station," Officer Rodriguez said without turning around. Marcus felt frustrated and helpless. He had spent his entire career working with police officers. He respected them and knew that most of them were good people trying to do a difficult job. But these two young officers seemed determined to treat him as guilty before they even knew what he might be guilty of. The drive to the police station took 15 minutes. Marcus knew the building well. He had been there many times for meetings and ceremonies. He had given speeches there about cooperation between the courts and the police. He had shaken hands with the police chief and praised officers for their service to the community. But today, he was seeing the police station from a very different point of view. Officer Miller parked in the back of the building, near a door marked Prisoner Intake. Marcus had never noticed that door before, even though he had visited the station dozens of times through the front entrance. "All right, let's go," Officer Rodriguez said, opening Marcus's door. Getting out of the car with handcuffs on was harder than Marcus had expected. His balance was off and he nearly fell. Officer Miller grabbed his arm roughly to steady him. "Watch it," Officer Miller said, as if Marcus had tried to fall on purpose. They walked Marcus through the prisoner entrance and into a small windowless room. The walls were painted a dull green color, and there was a strong smell of cleaning chemicals. A desk sergeant sat behind a thick piece of glass, looking bored. "What do we have here?" the desk sergeant asked. "Suspicious activity in the park," Officer Rodriguez said. "Resisting arrest and disorderly conduct." The desk sergeant looked at Marcus with tired eyes. "Name?" "Marcus Thompson," Marcus said clearly. The desk sergeant started typing on his computer without really looking at Marcus. "Address?" Marcus gave his address, his phone number, and other basic information. The whole process felt strange and degrading. He was used to being the person asking questions, not answering them as a suspect. "Any medical conditions or medications?" the desk sergeant asked. "High blood pressure medication," Marcus said. "The pills are at home." "We'll note that," the desk sergeant said, still not looking up from his computer. Marcus tried again to explain who he was. "Sir, I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding. I'm Judge Marcus Thompson from the county courthouse. I was just exercising in the park when these officers arrested me. If you could just make a phone call." Yeah, the desk sergeant said, cutting him off. "Everyone's innocent. Everyone's been wrongly arrested. Save it for your lawyer." Officer Miller leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "Guy keeps claiming he's a judge." "Can you believe that?" "I've heard it all," the desk sergeant said with a laugh. "Last week we had a guy who said he was the mayor." Marcus felt his heart sink. These people were not going to listen to him. They had already decided he was lying, probably because they could not imagine that a real judge would be arrested while jogging in old clothes. "I need to make a phone call," Marcus said. "That's my right." "You'll get your phone call," the desk sergeant said, "after we finish processing you." The processing took a long time. Marcus was fingerprinted, which left black ink on his fingers. He was photographed from the front and from the side. like he had seen in countless mugshots over the years. They took his wallet, his house keys, and the small amount of cash he had with him. Looking through his wallet, the desk sergeant pulled out Marcus's driver's license. Marcus Thompson, age 52, lives on Oak Street, he read aloud. Then he pulled out Marcus's courthouse identification card. It was a white plastic card with his photo and the words, "Honor Marcus Thompson, Circuit Court Judge," printed clearly on it. For a moment, the desk sergeant stared at the card. Then he looked up at Marcus, then back at the card. "Hey, Miller," he called to Officer Miller. "Come look at this." Officer Miller walked over to the desk. The sergeant handed him the courthouse ID card. Officer Miller's face went pale as he read it. This has to be fake," he said, but his voice was shaky. "It looks pretty real to me," the desk sergeant said. He had suddenly become more interested in the case. "Run his name through the system," Officer Miller said quickly. The desk sergeant typed Marcus's name into his computer. After a few seconds, information appeared on the screen. Marcus could not see what it said, but he watched the desk sergeant's expression change from boredom to surprise to worry. "Oh no," the desk sergeant said quietly. "Oh no, what?" Officer Rodriguez asked, walking over to see what was happening. "He really is a judge," the desk sergeant said. "Judge Marcus Thompson, appointed to the circuit court 12 years ago. Home address matches his driver's license. Everything checks out." The room became very quiet. Officers Miller and Rodriguez looked at each other with growing panic in their eyes. "This can't be right," Officer Rodriguez said. "He was acting suspicious in the park. Someone called it in." "What exactly was he doing that was suspicious?" the desk sergeant asked. He was sitting on a bench," Officer Miller said slowly. "Sitting on a bench," the desk sergeant repeated. "In a public park?" "On a Saturday morning, while wearing jogging clothes." Officer Rodriguez tried to defend their actions. He seemed out of place, and when we asked for ID, he was being difficult. "I was not being difficult," Marcus said firmly. "I cooperated with everything you asked. I told you exactly who I was from the beginning." The desk sergeant looked at Marcus with new respect. "Your Honor, I am deeply sorry about this situation. There has obviously been a terrible mistake." "Yes, there has," Marcus said. "And I would like to know what you plan to do about it." The officers were whispering frantically to each other. Marcus heard words like lawsuit and fired and career over. "Your Honor," the desk sergeant said, "we can release you immediately. We can drop all charges and pretend this never happened." Marcus thought about that offer for a moment. Part of him wanted to accept it, to go home and forget this nightmare had ever occurred. He wanted to take a shower, change clothes, and have breakfast with his wife Sarah. But another part of him knew that this was bigger than just his personal embarrassment. If these officers had treated him this way, a well-dressed, polite, middle-aged man, how did they treat other people who did not have his education, his status, or his connections? "I want to make my phone call now," Marcus said. "Of course, Your Honor," the desk sergeant said. Right away, they led Marcus to a phone in a small room. His hands were finally uncuffed, and he rubbed his sore wrists. The skin was red and marked where the metal had cut into him. Marcus dialed his home number. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Sarah, it's me," Marcus said. "Marcus? Where are you? I thought you'd be home from your run by now." "I made breakfast." Marcus closed his eyes. How could he explain this to his wife? How could he tell her that her husband, a respected judge, had been arrested like a common criminal? "Sarah," he said slowly, "I'm at the police station. I've been arrested." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Arrested?" Sarah's voice was shocked. "What are you talking about?" "Arrested for what?" "It's a long story," Marcus said. "Can you call John Peterson and ask him to come down here?" John Peterson was their family lawyer and an old friend. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What happened?" "I'll explain everything when I get home," Marcus said. "Just call John, please. Tell him I'm at the Central Police Station and I need him here as soon as possible." After he hung up, Marcus sat alone in the small room. He looked at his hands, still stained with fingerprint ink. He thought about the mugshot they had taken, the handcuffs, the degrading treatment. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Thompson understood what it felt like to be powerless in the justice system. He understood what it meant to have your word doubted, your dignity stripped away, your rights ignored. It was a lesson he would never forget. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. The desk sergeant peered in. "Your Honor," he said nervously, "your lawyer is here." John Peterson arrived at the police station within an hour of Sarah's phone call. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, wearing a wrinkled weekend shirt and jeans. Marcus had never been so happy to see his old friend. "Marcus, what in the world happened?" John asked as they sat in a small meeting room at the police station. Marcus told him the entire story, from his peaceful morning jog to the confrontation with the officers to his arrest and booking. John listened carefully, taking notes and shaking his head in disbelief. "This is outrageous," John said when Marcus finished. "We can have you out of here in 30 minutes and file a lawsuit by Monday morning." "I don't want to leave yet," Marcus said quietly. John looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I want to go through the system the same way everyone else does," Marcus said. "If I'm going to be charged with a crime, then I want to face those charges in court just like any other citizen would." "Marcus, that's crazy," John said. "You're a judge. Everyone knows this was a mistake." "But what about all the people who aren't judges?" Marcus asked. "What about the people who get arrested every day for the same kinds of made-up charges? They don't get to walk away just because someone realizes they made a mistake." John was quiet for a moment. He had been practicing law for 30 years and he understood what Marcus was saying. "Are you sure about this?" John asked. "I'm sure," Marcus said. "I want to spend the night in jail. I want to see what it's really like." John tried to change Marcus's mind, but he knew his friend was stubborn. Finally, he agreed to help Marcus stay in the system rather than get released. "I'll make sure you're safe," John said, "and I'll have you in front of a judge first thing Monday morning for bail hearing." "In front of which judge?" Marcus asked with a tired smile. John realized the irony. "Oh my God," he said. "You're scheduled to work Monday morning, aren't you?" "That's right," Marcus said. "I'm supposed to be hearing cases in my own courtroom." After John left, Marcus was taken to a holding cell. The cell was small and cold, with concrete walls painted a faded yellow color. There was a narrow metal bench along one wall and a toilet in the corner with no privacy. The smell was a mixture of disinfectant and human misery. Marcus was not alone in the cell. There were 3 other men there, all younger than him. One was sleeping on the floor, using his jacket as a pillow. Another was sitting on the bench, staring at the wall. The third was pacing back and forth in the small space. "What are you in for?" the pacing man asked Marcus. "Resisting arrest and disorderly conduct," Marcus said, still finding it hard to believe those words applied to him. "Same here," the man said with a bitter laugh. "I was walking home from my job at the restaurant when 2 cops stopped me. Said I looked suspicious. When I asked why, they arrested me for resisting arrest. How can you resist arrest if you weren't being arrested for anything in the first place?" Marcus looked at the young man more carefully. He was maybe 25 years old, black, wearing the uniform of a fast food restaurant. His name tag said Jerome. "That doesn't make sense," Marcus said. "Nothing about this place makes sense," said the man sitting on the bench. He was older, maybe 40, with tired eyes and work clothes. "I'm here because I couldn't pay a traffic ticket on time. They issued a warrant for my arrest. I make minimum wage at the warehouse, and I had to choose between paying the ticket and buying food for my kids." The third man, the one who had been sleeping, woke up and joined their conversation. He was young, maybe 19, and looked scared. "This is my first time in jail," he said quietly. "I got arrested for jaywalking. The officer said I was being disrespectful when I asked why he was giving me a ticket for crossing the street." Marcus listened to their stories with growing amazement. These were not hardened criminals. They were working people, men with jobs and families, who had been swept into the justice system for minor infractions or for no reason at all. "What happens next?" the young man asked. "Depends on whether you can make bail," Jerome said. "If you can't, you sit here until your court date. That could be weeks or months." "Weeks?" the young man asked, alarmed. "I've been here 3 days already," said the older man. "My bail is set at $500. I don't have $500. My family doesn't have $500. So I sit here while I lose my job and my family struggles to pay rent." Marcus had set bail amounts thousands of times in his career. $500 had always seemed like a reasonable amount for a minor offense. Now listening to this man, he realized that $500 might as well be $5 million for someone who was already struggling to survive. "What kind of work do you do?" Marcus asked the older man. "Warehouse work. Loading trucks, moving boxes. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. At least it did until I got arrested. They probably gave my job to someone else by now. Can't you call your boss and explain?" Marcus asked. The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sure, I can call him. I can say, hey boss, I can't come to work because I'm in jail for not paying a traffic ticket. I'm sure he'll hold my job open. As the day went on, Marcus talked with his cellmates and learned about their lives. Jerome had 2 young children and was working 2 jobs to support them. He had been saving money to go back to school, but now he would have to spend his savings on a lawyer instead. The older man, whose name was Robert, had been trying to get his life back together after losing his previous job in a factory that closed down. He had finally found steady work at the warehouse, but now that was probably gone too. The young man, Danny, was a college student working part-time to help pay his tuition. He was terrified that his arrest would affect his financial aid or his ability to graduate. The system is set up against people like us, Jerome said. If you don't have money, you can't get out. If you can't get out, you lose your job. If you lose your job, you can't pay your bills or support your family. It's a trap. Marcus had never thought about it that way before. In his courtroom, he saw people as cases, as legal problems to be solved. He set bail amounts based on legal guidelines and precedents. He had never really considered what those amounts meant to real people with real lives and real responsibilities. What about public defenders? Marcus asked. They're good people, but they're overworked, Robert said. My public defender has about 100 cases. He spends maybe 5 minutes with each client. He doesn't have time to really understand what's happening or fight for the best outcome. Most of the time, they just tell you to take a plea deal, Jerome added. Even if you're innocent, it's easier to plead guilty to a lesser charge than to fight it and risk going to jail for months waiting for a trial. Marcus thought about all the plea bargains he had approved over the years. People standing in front of him, pleading guilty to crimes they may not have committed just to get out of jail and back to their lives. He had always assumed they were guilty and taking responsibility for their actions. Now he wondered how many of them were just trying to survive a system that seemed designed to crush them. As night fell, the holding cell became even more crowded. More men were brought in throughout the evening, each with their own story of how they had ended up there. Some were clearly guilty of the crimes they were charged with, but many others seemed to be victims of the same kind of arbitrary enforcement that had landed Marcus in jail. The lights in the cell never went out completely. There was always a harsh fluorescent glow that made it hard to sleep. The metal bench was uncomfortable and the concrete floor was cold and hard. Marcus tried to rest, but every time he started to drift off, someone would be brought in or taken out and the noise would wake him up. Around midnight, a guard brought around thin sandwiches and small cups of water for dinner. The sandwich was 2 pieces of white bread with a slice of processed cheese. It tasted like cardboard, but Marcus ate it anyway. He realized that many of the men in the cell had not eaten anything else all day. Is this what you get for meals? Marcus asked Robert. This is the deluxe meal, Robert said sarcastically. Breakfast is usually just a piece of toast. If you're lucky, you get peanut butter on it. Marcus thought about the breakfast Sarah had probably made that morning. Eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, coffee. Food that was waiting for him at home while he sat in jail eating a cheese sandwich that barely qualified as food. How do people survive in here for weeks or months? Marcus asked. Some don't, Jerome said quietly. I've seen guys come in here healthy and leave broken. The system wears you down. It's designed to make you give up. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself thinking about every decision he had made as a judge, every bail amount he had set, every sentence he had imposed, every time he had been impatient with a defendant who seemed to be wasting the court's time. He thought about the times defendants had tried to explain their circumstances to him, and he had cut them off because he had a busy schedule. He thought about the times he had seen someone appear in his courtroom again and again for minor offenses, and he had assumed they were habitual criminals rather than people trapped in a system they could not escape. Most of all, he thought about how different his own experience had been. When the desk sergeant realized he was a judge, the whole tone of his treatment changed. People started calling him Your Honor again. His Sunday morning arrived slowly in the holding cell. Marcus had barely slept on the hard concrete floor, using his thin jail blanket as both mattress and cover. His back ached, his neck was stiff, and the fluorescent lights had given him a headache that would not go away. The breakfast was exactly what Robert had promised: a piece of dry toast and a small cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted like water. Marcus ate it anyway, realizing that he was genuinely hungry for the first time in years. First night in jail is always the hardest, Jerome said, seeing Marcus stretch his sore muscles. How many times have you been here? Marcus asked. Too many, Jerome said sadly. Usually for stuff like this. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time, looking suspicious, not moving fast enough when a cop tells me to move. It's like there's a target on my back. Marcus was beginning to understand that Jerome's experience was not unusual. Throughout the night, he had listened to dozens of men tell similar stories. Black men, Hispanic men, poor white men, all swept into the system for minor infractions or no reason at all. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, a guard appeared at the cell door. "Thompson," he called out. "You have a visitor." Marcus was surprised. John Peterson was not supposed to come back until later. He followed the guard down a long hallway to the same small meeting room where he had talked with his lawyer the day before. But it was not John waiting for him. It was Chief of Police William Harrison. Chief Harrison was a big man with gray hair and a serious face. Marcus had known him for years through their work together in the justice system. They had always had a good professional relationship. Now Chief Harrison looked extremely uncomfortable. "Judge Thompson," he said, standing up as Marcus entered the room, "I cannot tell you how sorry I am about this situation." Marcus sat down across from him. "Hello, Bill." "This is a disaster," Chief Harrison said. "When I found out this morning that 2 of my officers had arrested you, I could not believe it. I came in here on my day off to personally apologize and make sure you get released immediately." "I appreciate that, Bill," Marcus said, "but I'm not ready to be released yet." Chief Harrison looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to go through the system like everyone else does," Marcus said. "I want my bail hearing just like any other defendant would get. But Judge Thompson, this is ridiculous. Everyone knows you're not a criminal. This was obviously a mistake, and was it?" Marcus asked. "Or was it exactly how your officers are trained to behave?" Chief Harrison was quiet for a moment. He had been a police officer for 30 years, and he knew what Marcus was suggesting. "Those officers made serious errors in judgment," he said finally. "Did they?" Marcus asked. "Or did they do exactly what they always do when they see a black man in a place where they think he doesn't belong?" Chief Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Judge Thompson, I know my officers are not perfect, but—" "Bill, let me ask you something," Marcus interrupted. "If those same officers had seen a white man in expensive jogging clothes sitting on that same bench, would they have approached him the same way?" Chief Harrison did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. "I thought so," Marcus said. "What do you want me to do?" Chief Harrison asked. "I want you to let the system work," Marcus said. "I want to have my bail hearing tomorrow morning, just like it's scheduled. I want to be treated exactly like every other defendant." "But you're not every other defendant," Chief Harrison said. "You're a judge. This could destroy those officers' careers." "Maybe it should," Marcus said quietly. Chief Harrison looked shocked. "Judge Thompson, I know you're angry, but I'm not just angry, Bill, I'm educated. For the first time in my career, I really understand what happens to people in this system. Do you know what the men in that holding cell are guilty of? Walking home from work, crossing the street, not paying a traffic ticket on time, sitting on a park bench. Some of them are probably guilty of real crimes," Chief Harrison said. "Some of them, yes, but not most. And even the ones who are guilty of real crimes are being treated worse than we treat animals. They're fed 1 meal a day of food that's barely edible. They sleep on concrete floors. They're denied basic dignity and respect." Chief Harrison was getting defensive. "Judge Thompson, we follow all the legal requirements for prisoner care." "Legal requirements are not the same as human decency," Marcus said. "Just because something is legal doesn't make it right. What do you want me to do about it?" "I want you to start by properly training your officers," Marcus said. "I want you to teach them that a black man sitting on a park bench is not automatically suspicious. I want you to teach them to talk to people before they arrest them." "We do train our officers," Chief Harrison said. "Not well enough, apparently," Marcus replied. "Your officers arrested a judge for sitting on a bench. If they can make that kind of mistake with me, what kind of mistakes are they making with people who don't have my education or connections?" Chief Harrison was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "What if I promise you that those 2 officers will receive additional training? What if I promise you that we'll review our procedures for handling these kinds of situations?" "That's a start," Marcus said. "But I still want my day in court. Judge Thompson, think about this rationally. If you go through with a bail hearing, it's going to be all over the news. Everyone will know that you were arrested. It could hurt your reputation. Marcus had been thinking about that all night. His reputation was important to him. He had worked hard to build respect in the community, but he had also realized that some things were more important than reputation. Maybe people need to know, Marcus said. Maybe they need to understand what really happens in our justice system. But what about your family? What about your wife? This is going to be embarrassing for her. Marcus thought about Sarah. She had probably spent all day yesterday worrying about him, wondering how her husband had ended up in jail. But he also knew that Sarah would understand why he was doing this. She had always supported him when he tried to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. Sarah will understand, Marcus said. Chief Harrison tried one more time. Judge Thompson, I'm begging you to reconsider. Let me release you now. We can handle this quietly internally. No one has to know what happened. But that's exactly the problem, Bill. These things happen all the time and no one knows about it because they're handled quietly, internally. The officers get a slap on the wrist and nothing changes. So what's your solution? Accountability, Marcus said simply. Real consequences for real mistakes, and real changes in how we train officers and how we treat people in the system. Chief Harrison stood up to leave. I can't talk you out of this? No, you can't. Then I guess I'll see you in court tomorrow morning. Yes, you will, Marcus said. But Bill, you might want to think about which side you're going to be on. After Chief Harrison left, Marcus was taken back to the holding cell. Word had somehow gotten around that he was a judge and the other inmates were curious about his situation. So you're really a judge? Danny, the college student, asked. I am, Marcus said. And you're going to stay in here with us instead of using your connections to get out? Jerome asked. That's right. Why? Robert asked. Marcus looked around the cell at these men who had become his teachers over the past day and night. They had shown him a side of the justice system that he had never seen before, even though he had been part of it for 12 years. Because I've learned something important in here, Marcus said. I've learned that justice is supposed to be blind, but it's not. I've learned that the system I've been part of for years is broken, and I've been too comfortable to see it. What are you going to do about it? Jerome asked. I'm going to try to fix it, Marcus said. Starting tomorrow morning in my own courtroom. The men in the cell looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. They had heard promises from judges and lawyers before, but there was something different about Marcus, something that made them think he might actually mean what he said. You know what the crazy thing is? Robert said. Tomorrow morning you're going to be standing where we stand all the time. You're going to be the defendant instead of the judge. You're going to know what it feels like to have someone else decide your fate. Marcus nodded. That's exactly what I need to experience. And you're not scared? Danny asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The truth was he was scared. He was scared about what this would do to his reputation, his career, his family. He was scared about facing his colleagues as a defendant instead of as their equal. But he was more scared about going back to his old life and pretending that this experience had never happened. He was more scared about continuing to be part of a system that destroyed people's lives without him even noticing. I'm terrified, Marcus said honestly, but I'm more terrified of doing nothing. As Sunday evening approached, Marcus knew that tomorrow would be the most important day of his career. He would walk into his own courtroom not as Judge Thompson but as Defendant Thompson. He would stand before the bench where he had sat for 12 years and wait to hear what his bail would be set at. Most importantly, he would have the chance to show the world what he had learned during his night in jail. He would have the chance to speak for Jerome and Robert and Danny and all the other men who... Monday morning came too soon. Marcus was awake long before the guards came to get him. He had spent most of the night thinking about what he would say and how he would handle the most unusual day of his judicial career. At 6 o'clock, a guard appeared at the cell door with a list of names for morning court appearances. Thompson Marcus, he called out. Marcus stood up slowly. His body was stiff and sore from 2 nights on the concrete floor. He looked around the cell at Jerome, Robert, Danny, and the other men who had become his teachers and friends. Good luck, Judge, Jerome said quietly. Thank you, Marcus replied. All of you. Marcus was handcuffed again and led through the underground tunnel that connected the jail to the courthouse. He had walked through this same tunnel hundreds of times as a judge, but always from the other direction. Now he was seeing it from the perspective of every defendant who had appeared in his courtroom. The tunnel was cold and dimly lit. The walls were painted a dull gray color that made everything feel hopeless. Marcus understood now why defendants often looked defeated before their cases even began. The system was designed to make them feel small and powerless. When they reached the courthouse, Marcus was taken to a holding room where other defendants were waiting for their hearings. Some were dressed in orange jail uniforms. Others were wearing the same clothes they had been arrested in days or weeks before. Marcus recognized some of the faces. These were people who had appeared in his courtroom before, caught in the revolving door of the justice system. They looked at him with curiosity, wondering what a well-dressed black man in jogging clothes was doing in the defendant holding room. "First time?" asked an older woman sitting next to him. "Yes," Marcus said. "You'll be fine," she said kindly. "Just be respectful to the judge and don't try to argue. Judges don't like it when you argue." Marcus almost smiled at the irony, but he kept his expression serious. "What are you here for?" "Shoplifting," the woman said. "I took some food for my grandchildren. My daughter lost her job and we didn't have any money for groceries. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't let those babies go hungry." Marcus looked at this grandmother who had committed a crime out of desperation to feed her family. In his courtroom, he had seen dozens of cases like hers. He had usually given them the minimum sentence allowed by law, thinking he was being compassionate. Now he wondered if he had ever really understood what drove people to make such choices. At 9 o'clock, the defendants started being called for their hearings. Marcus listened as names were read aloud, and people were led away in handcuffs to face their fate. Some came back quickly with disappointed faces. Their bail had been set too high for them to pay. Others did not come back at all, either because they had been released or because they had been sentenced to more jail time. Finally, Marcus heard his own name called. "Thompson Marcus." The guard led him through the door he had entered through so many times before, but from the opposite direction. As he walked into the courtroom, Marcus saw a scene that was both familiar and completely foreign. The courtroom was packed. Word had gotten out somehow that Judge Marcus Thompson was appearing as a defendant, and every seat was filled. Marcus saw reporters with notebooks, fellow judges, lawyers he had worked with for years, and community leaders he recognized. In the front row, he saw Sarah. She was dressed in her best suit, sitting up straight with a worried but determined expression on her face. Their eyes met, and she gave him a small nod of encouragement. But the most shocking sight was behind the judge's bench. Sitting in Marcus's own chair, wearing the black robes of justice, was Judge Patricia Williams. Judge Williams was a colleague and friend who had been appointed to the bench around the same time as Marcus. She looked as uncomfortable as Marcus felt. "This is highly irregular," Judge Williams said to the court clerk. "I've never presided over a case involving a fellow judge." "The chief judge assigned you to this case specifically," the clerk replied. All the other judges recused themselves due to their professional relationship with Judge Thompson. Judge Williams looked down at Marcus with a mixture of sympathy and professional obligation. "Mr. Thompson, you are charged with resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. How do you plead?" The formality of being called Mr. Thompson instead of Judge Thompson was jarring. Marcus was now just another defendant in the system he had served for so many years. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Marcus said clearly. "The state requests bail be set at $5,000, said the prosecutor, a young assistant district attorney whom Marcus had seen in his courtroom many times. $5,000. Marcus thought about Robert in the holding cell, who could not afford $500 bail for a traffic ticket. $5,000 would be impossible for most of the people Marcus had met in jail. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Williams said, "you are a respected member of this community with deep ties to this jurisdiction. You have no prior criminal record, and you are not considered a flight risk. However, you are charged with serious offenses." Marcus listened as Judge Williams went through the same routine he had performed thousands of times. The difference was that now he was hearing it from the defendant's perspective, waiting to learn whether he would go home to his wife or back to the concrete cell. "Bail is set at $1,000, Judge Williams announced. $1,000. It was less than what the prosecutor had requested, but still an amount that would keep many people in jail simply because they could not afford to pay it. John Peterson, who was sitting at the defense table, stood up. "Your Honor, Mr. Thompson would like to make a statement to the court." Judge Williams looked surprised. "Mr. Thompson, it's unusual for defendants to make statements at bail hearings. Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus stood up. He looked around the packed courtroom, at the reporters with their pens ready, at his fellow judges watching with curious expressions, at Sarah in the front row giving him strength. "Yes, Your Honor, I have something important to say." The courtroom became completely quiet. Everyone leaned forward to hear what the arrested judge would say. "Your Honor," Marcus began, "2 days ago I was a judge sitting on the other side of this bench. I thought I understood the justice system because I had been part of it for 12 years. I was wrong." He paused and looked directly at Judge Williams. "I have spent the last 2 nights in jail not because I committed any crime, but because 2 police officers saw a black man sitting on a park bench and assumed he was up to no good." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Williams banged her gavel for order. "During my time in jail, I met men who were there for walking home from work, for crossing the street, for being unable to pay traffic tickets. I met a grandmother who stole food for her hungry grandchildren. I met a college student who was arrested for jaywalking." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. "These people are not criminals, Your Honor. They are victims of a system that has lost sight of its purpose. We have created a system that criminalizes poverty, that treats being black or Hispanic as suspicious behavior, that destroys families for minor infractions." The prosecutor started to object, but Judge Williams waved him off. She was listening intently to Marcus's words. "Your Honor, you just set my bail at $1,000. That's a reasonable amount for someone with my income and resources. But for most of the people I met in that holding cell, $1,000 might as well be $1 million. They will sit in jail not because they are guilty, but because they are poor." Marcus turned to face the packed courtroom. "I see reporters here today. I see fellow judges and lawyers and community leaders. You are all here because a judge got arrested, and that's unusual enough to be newsworthy. But where are you when Jerome gets arrested for walking home from his restaurant job? Where are you when Robert gets arrested because he couldn't pay a traffic ticket? Where are you when Danny gets arrested for jaywalking?" The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the court reporter had stopped typing to listen. "I am not the victim here," Marcus continued. "I am the beneficiary of a system that treats me better because of my education, my position, and yes, my connections. The real victims are the people who appear in these courtrooms every day without anyone noticing or caring about their stories." Marcus turned back to Judge Williams. "Your Honor, I accept the bail amount you have set, but I want everyone in this courtroom to know that I will use this experience to fight for changes in our system, real changes that will make justice truly blind, not just blind to the suffering of people who don't have power or privilege." Judge Williams nodded slowly. "Mr. Thompson, your statement is noted for the record. Bail remains set at $1,000. Your preliminary hearing is scheduled for next Monday at 9 a.m. As Marcus was led away from the courtroom, he heard the explosion of voices behind him. Reporters were shouting questions and people were talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. But Marcus was thinking about something else. In a few hours he would post bail and go home to his comfortable house and his loving wife. He would take a hot shower, eat a real meal, and sleep in his own bed. Jerome, Robert, Danny, and the grandmother who stole food for her grandchildren would still be in their cells tonight and probably for many more nights to come. 1 week later, Marcus walked back into his own courtroom, but this time everything was different. He was wearing his judicial robes again, sitting behind the bench where he belonged. The packed courtroom looked familiar, but Marcus saw it now through different eyes. The week between his bail hearing and his preliminary hearing had been the busiest of Marcus's life. News of his arrest and his statement in court had spread across the country. Television reporters had camped outside his house. Newspaper editorials had been written about his case. Social media had exploded with discussions about racial profiling and criminal justice reform. But Marcus had not spent the week hiding from the attention. Instead, he had used it as an opportunity to educate people about the problems he had witnessed in the justice system. He had given interviews to newspapers and television stations, always focusing on the bigger issues rather than his personal situation. He had spoken at community meetings and church gatherings. He had met with civil rights organizations and law enforcement groups. Most importantly, he had spent time with the families of men like Jerome, Robert, and Danny, learning about how the justice system affected real people's lives. Now, as Marcus looked out at the courtroom, he saw many of those same faces in the gallery. Jerome's mother was there along with Robert's wife and children. Danny's college roommates had come to show their support. The grandmother who had stolen food for her grandchildren was sitting in the back row, having finally made bail with help from a community organization. But the most important people in the courtroom were sitting at the defendant's table. Officers Jake Miller and Tony Rodriguez were there with their lawyer, facing charges of false arrest, civil rights violations, and misconduct in office. The irony was not lost on Marcus. The two officers who had arrested him were now sitting where he had sat just 1 week before, waiting to learn their fate. District Attorney Rebecca Martinez stood up to address the court. Marcus had worked with her for years and respected her commitment to justice. "Your Honor," she said, "the state has carefully reviewed all the evidence in this case. We have interviewed witnesses, examined police reports, and reviewed video footage from security cameras in Riverside Park." Marcus listened carefully. He was curious to hear what evidence had been found. The evidence clearly shows that Judge Thompson was engaged in lawful activity when he was approached by the defendant officers. He was sitting peacefully on a park bench after completing his morning run. He was properly dressed for exercise and posed no threat to anyone. DA Martinez continued, "The evidence also shows that Judge Thompson fully cooperated with the officers' requests. He identified himself truthfully and offered to provide identification. At no point did he resist arrest or engage in disorderly conduct." Marcus looked at Officers Miller and Rodriguez. They sat quietly, staring straight ahead, their faces showing a mixture of embarrassment and fear. Furthermore, DA Martinez said, "Our investigation has revealed that this was not an isolated incident. Officers Miller and Rodriguez have a pattern of making questionable arrests, particularly involving minority citizens engaged in lawful activities." This was news to Marcus. He had not known about the pattern of behavior. In the past year alone, these officers have made 17 arrests for resisting arrest, where no underlying crime was alleged. 14 of those arrests involved Black or Hispanic individuals. Most of those charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence. The courtroom was completely silent as people absorbed this information. "Your Honor, the state believes that Officers Miller and Rodriguez violated their oath to serve and protect when they arrested Judge Thompson. More importantly, they have violated the civil rights of numerous citizens through their pattern of discriminatory enforcement." DA Martinez paused and looked directly at Marcus. "However, Your Honor, Judge Thompson has asked us to consider the possibility of a resolution that focuses on education and reform rather than simply punishment." Marcus had indeed suggested this approach. During his week of reflection, he had realized that simply punishing the two officers would not solve the larger problem. What was needed was systemic change. "With the court's permission," DA Martinez continued, "the state would like to propose a plea agreement that includes mandatory training, community service, and ongoing supervision, along with departmental reforms that address the root causes of this incident." The defense attorney for the officers stood up. "Your Honor, my clients accept responsibility for their actions and are prepared to participate in any training or reform program the court deems appropriate." Marcus looked at the two young officers. They were barely older than his own son. They had made serious mistakes, but Marcus believed they could learn from those mistakes and become better police officers. "Officers Miller and Rodriguez," Marcus said, "please stand." The two men stood up, looking nervous and ashamed. "You arrested me because you saw a Black man in a place where you thought he didn't belong," Marcus said. "You did not talk to me or try to understand the situation. You immediately assumed I was up to no good, and you treated me as a threat rather than as a citizen." The officers looked down at their feet. "Your assumptions were based on my race, not on any criminal behavior. That is the definition of racial profiling, and it is unacceptable in our society." Marcus paused to let his words sink in. "However, I believe that your actions were the result of poor training and unconscious bias rather than deliberate malice. I believe you can learn from this experience and become better police officers." He looked out at the packed courtroom, then back at the officers. "Therefore, I am prepared to accept a plea agreement that includes the following conditions. You will each complete 200 hours of community service in minority communities. You will participate in comprehensive training on civil rights, cultural sensitivity, and community policing. You will be on probation for 2 years, during which time any similar incidents will result in termination and criminal prosecution." The officers nodded quickly, clearly relieved that they were not facing jail time. "But," Marcus continued, his voice becoming stern, "your punishment is not the most important part of today's proceedings. The most important part is what we are going to do to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Marcus turned to Chief Harrison, who was sitting in the front row. Chief Harrison, please stand. The police chief stood up, looking uncomfortable. Chief Harrison, you and I have worked together for years. I have always respected the difficult job that police officers do. But this incident has shown me that there are serious problems with how your officers are trained and how they interact with the community. Chief Harrison nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I am ordering the police department to implement immediate reforms, Marcus said. These reforms will include mandatory bias training for all officers, new procedures for citizen contacts, and the establishment of a civilian review board to investigate complaints of misconduct. Marcus had spent the week working with community organizations and civil rights groups to develop these reforms. They were not perfect, but they were a start. Additionally, Marcus continued, I am establishing a new court program that will provide alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders. Too many people are sitting in jail simply because they cannot afford bail. That ends today. The courtroom erupted in applause. Marcus banged his gavel for order, but he was smiling for the first time in a week. Finally, Marcus said, I want to address the media attention this case has received. I know that many people are interested in this story because a judge was arrested, but I want everyone to remember that the real story is not about me. The real story is about all the people who are arrested unfairly every day and do not have the privilege and platform that I have. Marcus looked out at Jerome's mother, Robert's family, and all the other people whose lives had been affected by the justice system. My arrest was news because I am a judge. But Jerome's arrest should have been news too. Robert's arrest should have been news. The grandmother who stole food for her grandchildren, her arrest should have been news. Every person who is arrested unjustly deserves the same attention and concern that my case has received. Marcus banged his gavel one final time. This court is committed to ensuring that justice is truly blind to race, blind to economic status, blind to social position. We will judge people by their actions, not by their appearance or their address. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Marcus remained on the bench, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A week ago, he had been a judge who thought he understood justice. Today, he was a judge who was still learning what justice really meant. Sarah approached the bench and smiled up at her husband. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Marcus smiled back. The work is just beginning, he said, and it was. Over the next several months, Marcus would implement sweeping changes in his courtroom and work with community organizations to reform the entire justice system. The changes would not be easy, and there would be resistance from some quarters. But Marcus had learned something important during his 2 nights in jail. Real change starts with understanding, and understanding starts with listening to the people who are affected by the system. He was finally ready to listen. 6 months after his arrest, Marcus Thompson stood in the same spot in Riverside Park where his life had changed forever. It was another Saturday morning, and he was wearing the same old running clothes he had worn that day in September. But everything else was different. The park was busy with joggers, dog walkers, and families enjoying the crisp spring morning. Marcus noticed that there were more Black and Hispanic families using the park now, people who might have felt unwelcome before. Word had spread through the community that this was a safe place, where police officers were more likely to greet you with a smile than treat you with suspicion. As Marcus stretched before his run, he saw a familiar face approaching. It was Jerome, the young man he had met in the holding cell. Jerome was pushing a stroller with a toddler inside and holding the hand of a slightly older child. Judge Thompson, Jerome called out with a big smile. Jerome, it's good to see you, Marcus said, genuinely pleased. Are these your children? Yes, sir. This is Marcus Jr., Jerome said, pointing to the toddler in the stroller. I named him after you. Marcus was touched and a little embarrassed. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Jerome said seriously. You changed my life, Judge Thompson. You changed all our lives. Marcus looked at Jerome more carefully. He looked healthier and happier than he had in the jail cell. His clothes were neat and clean, and he carried himself with more confidence. How are things going for you? Marcus asked. Much better, Jerome said. Remember how I was working 2 jobs and trying to save money for school? Well, I finally had enough saved up, and I started taking classes at the community college. I'm studying to be a paralegal. That's wonderful, Jerome. And you know what the best part is? When I told my professors about meeting you in jail and hearing your speech in court, they were so impressed that they helped me get a scholarship. I'm going to graduate next year. Marcus felt a warm feeling in his chest. This was exactly the kind of change he had hoped to see. What about Robert and Danny? Marcus asked. Do you keep in touch with them? Oh yes, Jerome said excitedly. Robert got his job back at the warehouse. His boss saw the news coverage about your case and he realized that Robert had been arrested unfairly. He not only gave Robert his job back, but he also gave him a promotion to supervisor. And Danny? Danny is doing great. He graduated from college last month and got accepted to law school. He says he wants to be a defense attorney and help people like us. Marcus smiled broadly. That's exactly what we need. More lawyers who understand what it's like to be on the other side of the system. Jerome shifted the stroller and looked at Marcus with gratitude. Judge Thompson, I want you to know that what you did changed everything for me and my family. When I was sitting in that cell, I felt hopeless. I thought the system was rigged against people like me and there was nothing I could do about it. You weren't wrong about the system being rigged, Marcus said, but you were wrong about not being able to do anything about it. That's what you showed us, Jerome said. You showed us that change is possible when people with power are willing to stand up for what's right. After Jerome left with his children, Marcus continued his run around the park. As he jogged, he thought about all the changes that had happened since that September morning. The police department had implemented the reforms Marcus had ordered. Officers Miller and Rodriguez had completed their community service and training. Surprisingly, they had both become advocates for the new training programs, sharing their story with other officers about how unconscious bias had led them to make a terrible mistake. Chief Harrison had retired early and been replaced by a new chief, who was committed to community policing. The Civilian Review Board was investigating complaints fairly and holding officers accountable. Most importantly, complaints against officers had dropped dramatically as police learned to interact with citizens more respectfully. Marcus's court reforms had been even more successful. The new bail program had kept hundreds of people out of jail while they waited for their trials. Many of those people had kept their jobs, maintained their housing, and stayed with their families instead of losing everything while sitting in a cell. The alternative sentencing program had diverted non-violent offenders into community service, job training and counseling programs. Repeat offenses had dropped by 30% as people got help. With the underlying problems that had led to their arrests, other judges around the state had started visiting Marcus's courtroom to learn about his reforms. Several had implemented similar programs in their own jurisdictions. Marcus had been invited to speak at law schools and judicial conferences about his experience and the lessons he had learned. As Marcus completed his first loop around the park, he saw another familiar face. It was Mrs. Patterson, the grandmother who had been arrested for shoplifting food for her grandchildren. She was sitting on a bench reading a book while two young children played on the nearby playground. Good morning, Mrs. Patterson, Marcus said, stopping to catch his breath. Judge Thompson, she said, standing up with a big smile. How are you doing? I'm doing well. How about you? Much better, thanks to you, she said. Remember how I was worried about going to jail and leaving my grandchildren with no one to take care of them? Marcus remembered. Mrs. Patterson's daughter had been struggling with drug addiction, and she had been the only stable adult in those children's lives. Instead of sending me to jail, you connected me with the community service program, Mrs. Patterson continued. I ended up working at the food bank helping other families who were struggling like we were. How did that work out? It was wonderful, she said. I learned so much about the resources available in our community. I also learned that I wasn't the only grandmother raising her daughter's children. There are support groups, childcare assistance, food programs, things I never knew existed. Mrs. Patterson gestured toward the children on the playground. My daughter is doing much better now, too. She's been clean for 4 months and is working part-time while she goes through a treatment program. We're hoping she'll be able to take full care of the children again soon. That's exactly how the system should work, Marcus said. Instead of punishing people for their problems, we should be helping them solve those problems. You know what the best part is? Mrs. Patterson said. I liked working at the food bank so much that they offered me a permanent job. Now I'm the coordinator for senior citizen services. I help other grandparents who are in the same situation I was in. Marcus felt that warm feeling again. This was the ripple effect he had hoped for. People who had been helped by the system were now helping others. As Marcus continued his run, he reflected on his own personal changes. The experience of being arrested and spending time in jail had fundamentally altered how he saw his role as a judge. He was no longer just interpreting the law and imposing sentences. He was actively working to make the justice system more just. His relationship with Sarah had grown stronger too. She had been his partner in all the reforms, attending community meetings with him and helping to coordinate the new court programs. She had also started volunteering at the literacy program in the jail, teaching inmates to read and write. "I'm proud of the man you've become," she had told him recently. "You were always a good judge, but now you're a great judge." Marcus's children had been supportive too. His daughter, the lawyer, had started doing more pro bono work for people who couldn't afford attorneys. His son, the doctor, had begun volunteering at a free clinic in a low-income neighborhood. As Marcus finished his second loop around the park, he thought about the broader impact of his story. The news coverage had sparked conversations about racial profiling and criminal justice reform across the country. Other communities had started implementing similar programs. Law schools were teaching his case as an example of how personal experience can lead to systemic change. But Marcus knew that the most important changes were the individual ones. Jerome going to college, Robert getting promoted, Danny becoming a lawyer, Mrs. Patterson finding meaningful work, and countless other people whose lives had been touched by the reforms. Marcus sat down on the same bench where he had been arrested 6 months earlier. The morning sun was warming his face, and he felt the same sense of peace he had felt that day before the officers arrived. But now his peace was deeper. It came not just from the physical exercise and the beautiful morning, but from the knowledge that he was using his position and his privilege to help people who didn't have the same advantages he had. His phone buzzed with a text message from his court administrator. "Judge Thompson, the new community court project has been approved by the state. They want you to lead the implementation statewide. Are you interested?" Marcus smiled as he typed his response. "Absolutely." As he stood up to walk home, Marcus saw a police officer approaching the park. For just a moment, he felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Then he recognized the officer. It was Tony Rodriguez, one of the men who had arrested him. "Good morning, Judge Thompson," Officer Rodriguez said respectfully. "Good morning, Officer Rodriguez. How are you?" "I'm doing well, sir." "I wanted to thank you again for giving me and Jake a second chance." "The training program you required us to complete really